Hello everybody, this is a review of the Hobbymate X160 carbon fiber frame. I'm going to be using this frame in a completely fresh copter build. So let's take a closer look at the parts. First of all, the frame. The frame is a 160 millimeter frame. So that means it's 160 millimeters from motor center to motor center. So you can see it's an X style frame. This bottom plate itself is about 3 millimeters thick. If we take a look at the top housing pieces, they're all 2 millimeters thick. Side plates and the rest of the top housing components are all 2 millimeters thick. Okay, so the frame also comes with standoffs. That's nice. Comes with some little screws to use with the standoffs. Has some little metal standoffs, so it's got both 2 different styles. It's got these little nylon type standoffs and these look to be aluminum standoffs. There's also some longer standoffs. These go in the middle of the frame. We'll assemble that in a second. So moving on to the motors. These are the Hobbymate 2205, 2300 kV brushless motors. I've been using these motors, these particular motors, for about a year now. They've worked out great. I have not had one single problem with these at all. For the ESCs, I'll be using these new Hobbymate 20 amp BLHeli ESCs. So these ESCs are rated up to 30 amps peak. They're configurable through BLHeli Suite or BLHeli Configurator, which of course uses the pass-through within CleanFlight and Betaflight. They come with a little extra piece of a heat shrink here that you can use to cover up your solder pads once you've soldered the motors on. They're really nice. I've got a standard FPV transmitter with a floor leaf clover antenna. I've got this is a Foxeer Monster V2. I'll be using that. You should note that this frame here can accommodate a full-size camera. It's nice. For the power distribution board, I just have a simple little board with a both 5 volt and 12 volt output. For the flight controller, I'll be using a SP Racing F3. Now look at this. This is the new Hobbymate FR Sky S-Bus or PPM or pulse width modulated receiver. I'll be binding this up to my Tyrannus, and so this is incredibly small. You can get an idea really how small it is. I think this weighs just about a gram here. It's got a bind button on it, so I'm looking forward to seeing how this works out. Got a battery strap. I've got the XT60 connectors. I got these. These are Hobbymate as well, available on Amazon. These are some 35-45 props to use on the frame, and I think that's it. So let's first kind of put together the frame without all the components on it, just to get an idea of how it assembles, so we can then figure out the best way to install all these components. Alright, so let's get our little screws and standoffs out and see what we got. I'm going to leave all these little guys in the bag. Okay, so we see here we got 2 side plates. They're identical. And we've got a bottom plate here. So this looks to go in here like this. Tight, snug fit, that's good. Make sure they're both going front ways here. Alright. Easy enough. So now, got a top plate. You know, the machining on these parts are really nice. There's no sharp edges. It's feels real good. You got a little back plate here. Slide that. Oops. Sometimes the stuff takes 3 hands. If I put the black plate in first. There we go. Now put the top plate in. Yeah, that works better. Okay. So then we have some standoffs here. You'll notice there are 3 holes. One, right here, right here, right here. Those go across there like that. Okay, that makes sense. And so we got 3 of those. So that's what those will be used for. We have some little standoffs here. Those go here, so we'll need a screw, one of these little screws here to come down and hold that, and then we'll put on the frame. So let me put this together, just loose fit, just real quick, and we'll come back and take a look at it. Alright, so there we go. We got the top plate assembled. You can see here that got the that looks to be the antenna mounting hole. This plate I could use to tape my video transmitter against. Camera will go in here. You can see there's a center hole. If you have a camera, it has the adjustment on the back with the extra little screw where you can put it in there. That'll work out good. That's what that's for. So next thing that would be on would be flight controller, like that. And so we'll need some of these little plastic standoffs now. So they'll go like that. Put one on the other side. Alright, there you go. It's starting to look just a little bit like a copter. Alright, so thinking about the video transmitter. Oh, look at that. Perfect. Put that there. Put a little double-sided sticky tape on the back of that. Motors will be here. ESCs here, so I'll be keeping the ESCs pretty close to the motors, so I can go ahead and do that separately. Run the wires up to the flight controller for the signal for the ESCs, and then power run to those power distribution board. Camera will go inside here, so I'll just loosen up those side screws and slide that in there. The receiver, I'll have to maybe put it inside on the top in here, perhaps. I just have to be able to get to the bind button to look and see where the best place is. I see a lot of people put them on the outside, but I'll see where that kind of fits. That can kind of be the last piece that goes in. Of course, we'll have the power coming out back side here on the power distribution board. Something about like that. You know, of course, trim that off. I think that's looking good. So I'll disassemble it again and we'll start soldering up everything. Alright, here I've disassembled it. I've taken the power distribution board and the flight controller out of the stack. You know, one thing I wanted to point out is in the kit you have two different length screws. So the shorter one you end up using in this location at the top here, and also use in the bottom standoffs here. I like to use the slightly longer one up top here, so that because I'll be spreading this apart slightly and loosening the top more than the bottom when I put the camera in. Also, the longer screws are the ones you need in the bottom here. So the shorter ones don't bite enough in the bottom of the nylon standoffs. So that's the ones you want to use. So you want to use the longer ones here in the bottom, and I used the longer ones up here on the top standoff, shorter ones everywhere else. So with that, let's see what this weighs with just the frame components. That's just the frame parts, nothing else. And it weighs around 55.5 grams. So that's is pretty light. So light and strong, and so that's gonna make some pretty good performance. So next up, I will be soldering the motors to the ESCs. I'll probably be trimming them back somewhere like that. I'll go ahead and do all those at once. One of the other things I like to do is I like to put some flux on here, and I tin these first. And I'll also put a little bit of flux when I strip back the wires on the motors. I'll probably cut them off about right there, so it'll be something about like that. And make them all the same, and we'll just go from there. Alright, let's trim these motor wires back a little bit, so about like that. Spread that out, strip those back. Don't need much. All right. Now I'll put a little bit of flux on those. Makes the solder, stuff's like magic. Always recommend using this. Put a little bit on. Doesn't take hardly any. Very light coat. Alright. Now I'll go ahead and tin the motor wires. Again, you can see how well that solder wicks. I'm going to use that flux. Do the same for the ESC. Clean out the soldering chip a little bit. See how nice that flows? These ESCs take solder really nicely. Alright.
Now it's just a matter of putting the wires on. Always start with the center one first. Get a little warm, that's it. That's all it takes. Go to the outside ones. Maybe bend that in just a hair. There we go. That's it. See, if you pre-tin them, it takes the solder really nicely. Alright. So that looks good. Now, put that on there after a while, and that'll cover up those pads. So I'll go ahead and do that to the other four, or the rest of the three of them, and I'll come back. Alright, so I've got all the motors soldered on the ESCs, and I've got the 3 of the 4 motors mounted on the frame. I went ahead and put the extra plastic heat shrink on here. I won't shrink this down until confirm everything's working right. One thing I wanted to show you was a lot of times motors come with 2 different size mounting screws, 4 of each. They got a shorter one and a longer one. You want to use a shorter one if you're not using the motor. If you're not using motor guards, you can see here that's the proper length to come through. If you use the longer one without the motor guards, you run the risk of the motor coming up into the motor windings. You don't want that. So always use the shorter ones when you're not using motor guards. So this is going to be the back of the copter here, my power distribution board. I will be putting on the power wire here in the back. Got the counter rotation motor, which typically are the ones with the silver caps, in the number 2 and number 3 position. So that's one I still got to put on yet. And then then the normal clockwise rotation motors in the number 1 and the number 4 position. So I'll go ahead and get this last motor on, and I'm gonna go ahead and tin the pads on this again using some flux on the power distribution board, and then we'll take a look and see what kind of makes sense to route these wires. Alright, so I've got that last motor mounted, and I've got tinned up all the pads on the power distribution board. So one of the things I have to start thinking about is that this is the 12 volts out, so this will be going to my camera and video transmitter, and then over here I've got the 5 volts out, so this will have to go up to the flight controller. So when I'm thinking about wiring these wires, the signal wires of course will have to end up coming up to the flight controller. So remember, this is the back here, so they'll be routed underneath here and come up to the appropriate pins for the pulse width modulated output over here. So we'll worry about that in a little bit. So for the power for the ESCs, each ESC's got power in each corner, so I'll end up just routing and get kind of the closest, shortest wires possible to go to the individual pads, and so some of these have to cross up just a little bit because the positive's on the left side of the ESC, but the pad is on the right, so some of these have to cross up just a little bit, but that'll be just fine too. So I'll go ahead and get those soldered up and come back. Alright, I've got the ESC power wire soldered on. You just want to make sure that you give yourself enough room to route around your standoffs. If you don't have your standoffs on when you're doing it, I have to keep them off because I end up bumping into them, but you just want to make sure you have enough room to get around your standoffs. So you can see here I had to route this one around the other way, and you just have to think about the cleanest routing possible. The other thing that I do is that I do each one at a time. I don't try to measure them all up and cut them all and then solder them all. I will measure just one, cut it, solder it, and then move on to the next one. So that way it seems to work out better. I went ahead and soldered on my 12 volt lead, so that'll run up top into the stack for the camera and video transmitter, and then this will be the lead that I end up powering my a flight controller with. So if you kind of think about the flight controller, so if this is the back of the copter and this is the front, so my flight controller is going to be like this. So I will end up running these leads over to the positive and negative along this bar here, and then each one of these ESC wires, so number 1 is going to have to come up to here, and number 2 is going to end up coming to 2, and so forth and so on. So I usually just put it upside down like this on the standoff, and then I can just flip it over when I'm done. So I'll solder them into the bottom, and that way when I flip it over, it'll be like that, and it'll be clean. So and the other thing I want to look at here is the battery lead. I went ahead and put the battery on there, trying to think about what's kind of the right length. So if I think, you know, fairly short is right for this, so I'm probably going to make it about like that. All right, so I'll do that and I'll come back. Okay, so now I got the battery lead on. I have all the ESC grounds and signal wires soldered on. I also connected up a buzzer to the buzzer pads. Let me show you where I put the buzzer. Put the buzzer right in the front here. I got the VBAT, battery monitoring voltage, coming off just one of the ESC pads. And I went ahead and wired in this FR Sky, this Hobbymate FR Sky micro receiver. Remember, that's for the 12 volts for the power, for the camera and the video TX. So anyway, so here is this micro receiver, and so it takes positive 5 volts here on VCC. It has S-Bus here. It has PPM here. You either select S-Bus or PPM depending on which 2 pads you bridge with solder. So I bridged the S-Bus pads. The PPM pads are down here. And you run ground. And so that's it. So I just, in this particular flight controller, I brought it in on UART3. Any serial channel that's available will work fine on your flight controller. And obviously you give it 5 volts, which is available on this UART. So I'm just amazed of how small that is, and it's got a bind button on it here too. So we'll set that up in Betaflight. So pretty much ready to go here to continue installing the components. So next up, I'll put on the video transmitter and the camera and get that wired up, and we'll find a good spot for this receiver, and so we'll start putting the stack up, the top of the stack up on next. So I got the bottom plate on. You can see there's a hole here you can run all your wires up through. I got the video TX and the camera wired up to the 12 volts coming off the power distribution board. And this particular camera has an OSD feature what monitors voltage, and I've got it wired up to the VBAT. So I'll go ahead and start putting the rest of the top plates on here and figure out a good spot for the receiver.
Okay, I finished the assembly, so now let's take a closer look. I put the video TX on the back like I was thinking. Got a couple real thin strips, narrow strips of double-sided tape holding it onto this back plate right here. Now on this back plate, on the inside, I went ahead and double-sided sticky taped the receiver in there. And I noticed there was this little hole at the top of this plate, which the little receiver wire works out really well going through. So I've got my, this is the OSD programming cable for my camera, little pigtail hanging out here. And the camera fits in nice and snug in here. I have to look at this and think to myself that this has worked out beyond my expectations. Everything is really clean. This frame has been really well thought out.
everything fits really nicely. I'm extremely happy with it. One of the things I didn't point out when I was wiring up the motors is, you don't have to worry about making sure that you won't have to end up switching any of the wire leads going from the ESC to the motor to reverse the direction like back in the old days. Now with the BLHeli suite, you can, in these ESCs, you can change the direction within the configurator. So that's one of the things we'll do when we look at it under Betaflight. We might end up having to reverse a couple of these motors, usually do. So with that, we will move over to the computer and we will look at Betaflight and the BLHeli Suite Configurator, and we'll get the rest of everything set up. So we'll see you over there.
So the first thing we need to do is to download Betaflight Configurator. So we'll just type that into Chrome. Very first search return is the Chrome app for Betaflight. Now, mine says launch app here, but if you haven't installed it yet, yours would say install app. So go ahead and install it if you haven't already, and then it will switch over and click to launch. Now, within Betaflight, we're going to go ahead and plug in our quadcopter. It's going to install the drivers if you haven't ever plugged it in before, and it's going to come up to a COM port. On mine, it comes up to COM 3. So now we click connect, and you know it's connected because if you move your quadcopter around within Betaflight, you can see it moving on the setup tab here. So first thing I'm going to do is to enable expert mode. We're going to go down through each one of these tabs and configure each one. So while you're on the setup tab, you can click calibrate accelerometer, and you'll see that these pitch and roll values will go down close to 0. Next, on to ports. Remember that I have mine set up, my serial RX is set up on UART3, so I have that enabled for serial RX. If you change that, you got to hit save and reboot on every one that you make any changes on, or it doesn't save it. Next on is configuration. Now I'm using these Hobbymate BLHeli 20 amp ESCs, and they're compatible with all these protocols. So these first 4, pulse width modulated, 1-shot 125 down to multi-shot, these are all analog protocols, and these last 3 are the digital protocols. And D-shot 600 is the fastest. So that's the one I'm going to select. I have motor stop enabled. I like that. Down here under receiver, got my S-bus receiver selected. If you would also use this to select if you have a Spectrum satellite, where you would for my receiver I have S-bus, but if you had the Spectrum satellites, you'd either select Spectrum 124 or Spectrum 2048. If you select the wrong one under Spectrum, under the receiver tab, all your channels will look messed up, so you just have to select the other one and hit save and reboot, and it usually works fine. So over here I got my battery voltage monitor and my VBAT, so this will alarm my buzzer if my battery voltage gets too low. Under my system configuration, I got my gyro update frequency set at 4 kilohertz and my PID loop frequency set at 2 kilohertz. That's about right. You can see my CPU load down here is around 20% or so. It could be a little higher, but that's fine. So all that, so hit save and reboot. Under failsafe, I've got it dropping. That's by default. That's good. Nothing else to change here. PID tuning, these are default. So here as we get ready to go to receiver, we'll go ahead and plug in a battery, turn on transmitter first, and remember that you do not want to have any props on while you do this. So plug in a battery. We'll go over to receiver. You can see here that my sticks are reacting within Betaflight correctly. And so if they were not in the right order on the channel map, you can change it here. Just put in the correct channel map for your radio. It stands for throttle, aileron, elevator, and rudder. You just can change the order of that. So one of the things you want to do here is that when your sticks are centered, you want to read approximately 1500, right in the midpoint. So if it doesn't, you need to adjust your subtrims. And you also, when you go all the way from one full direction all the way to the other, you want to read approximately from 1000 all the way up to 2000. So if it doesn't do that, you need to change your channel throw and so that it does. So I have aux1 set up on a 2-way switch. I have aux2 set up on a 3-way switch. And I have aux3 set up on a 2-way switch. So I'm going to use aux1 for my arming, aux2 for my flight mode, and aux3 for my beeper. Okay, so let's set up the modes. So I'm going to set up add range for arm. So in this position right here, for aux1, that will be armed. Now I'm going to set up my flight mode. First one will be angle, and that's on aux2. So I'll move this little slider over here. Next flight mode will be horizon. That'll be in the middle. So that needs to be on aux2 as well. So there we go. And the last one will be acro mode, which is air mode. I'll add air mode to that, which spins the props all the time in acro mode. And that one needs to be on aux2 also. The last one is beeper, and that'll be on aux3, and it'll be in the down switch position, and I think that's it. That looks good, so we'll hit save. There we go. And now let's check the beeper. There's my beeper working. My different flight modes are working. There's angle, horizon, air mode, and there is the arm switch working as well. All right, all set and ready to go. So now what we can do is we can go over to motors, and we need to test the directions of each one of our motors because you might have to reverse a couple of them within BLHeli. So we're going to go ahead and click this again, still no props, and we're going to test the motor direction on each one. So the very first motor we're going to test is number 1. So we'll spin up just a little bit here. It doesn't take much just to test the direction, and it should be spinning. Should be spinning clockwise, and it's spinning counterclockwise. So we're going to need to reverse number 1. So number 2 motor should be spinning counterclockwise, and it is. So that's good. Number 3 is should be spinning counterclockwise, and it is. Number 4 should be spinning clockwise, and is spinning counterclockwise. So within the BLHeli Suite configurator, we're going to need to reverse numbers 1 and 4. That's all we got to do here. We can turn off those motors and disconnect out of Clean Flight, and now we'll go over to BLHeli Configurator. So now we need to get BLHeli Configurator. There we go. So just like Betaflight, it's a Chrome app. So I've already got it installed. So again, I will just click Launch App. All right, so we still have the quadcopter plugged in to the battery, still no props, plugged into USB. See, it comes up COM3, just like Betaflight did. Hit connect. All right, so we'll click Read Setup. All right, so this is really straightforward. So these are all the common parameters over here. We really don't need to change anything over here. This is the firmware versions. That is the most recent firmware version at the time of this video. There's the type of firmware that has on my particular ESCs. So all we got to do is remember changing ESC 1 and 4 is a direction. So that's the top thing here. So we're going to reverse this one, reverse number 4. Then we're going to write the setup. And now it's going to write them all. And then we're going to read setup just to confirm. And there we are. That's all there is to it. So now number 1 and 4 are reversed. Okay, now you can arm your quad and run your motors at a very low throttle value and just confirm that those motors are all turning the correct direction, but that's all you have to do. So now we'll go ahead and put the props on, and we will take it out for a test flight.
Alright, so here we go. I got the 35-45 props on. When I take this down to the field, I have some 4-inch props that I'll try to see if they'll fit. I just want to make sure they have plenty of clearance around the stack up here. These 35-45 props do. And I may have enough room on the stack up clearance to be able to use a 4-inch prop. Just have to watch on some of the tighter clearances in the back here, maybe near the video TX and whatnot. Put a piece of Velcro here on the bottom. Battery can go on like this and run up here. Now you could use a longer piece, a longer battery lead, and run it down on the side here and maybe turn the battery around and connect it maybe like that. That would be another option. Alright, so let's check the weight. Alright, so quadcopter by itself, 252 grams. That's pretty light. If I add this 1000 milliamp hour 4-cell, that is 364 grams. So that's incredibly light. So just to give you an idea, so that was about 250 by itself. Here's my QAV 210 with the same motors, same speed controls, same flight controller. Everything's the same, except I do have this battery, this camera mount on here, which adds a little bit of weight. But that is 340 grams, so about 90 grams more heavy. That's probably about 10 grams. So about 80 grams heavier. And this is, you know, when I flew this has got incredible punch out and power. So I have some pretty high expectations of what this can do. So let's get this out to the field and give it a try. So here we are for the maiden of the Hobbymate X160 frame with the 2205 motors and the 20 amp ESCs. And this has got the 35-45 props on it. Feels really good. Let's try a little punch out. Alright, that's pretty good. Very responsive. Handles great. And these are the stock PIDs, so I could do some tuning still. And then a little punch out here. Nothing wrong with that at all. All right, let's bring this in. And we'll try some of those 4-inch props. All right, so here we are with some Gemspan 40-45 bullnose props. You can see here that it clears. It's close, but it does clear. If you had a shorter stack up that had your power distribution board and your flight controller integrated, looks like it could get close back in here. I might have to think about a little bit different way to mount something, but with this setup, looks like it clears, so let's give it a try. Alright. All important punch out. Alright, so that's got some more punch out than the other props.
Other props did good, but these are got some more punch out. Let's try that one more time. That's pretty fast. Give it a little fly around. That's incredible. This little quad handles so nice. I really like this size. These motors, it's a good combination. That's just really fast. Great punch out. All right, I got one more set of props I want to try. So let's get those on there. All right, so these are the Dow 4045 props, of course, just like the Gem Fan 4045s. They have the same clearance, so just the difference being that they're tri-blades. So let's give these a try. These should be the most aggressive yet. Let's give it a try here. So, yeah, those props give this quadcopter a lot of punch out with these 2205 motors. Here we go one more time. That's incredible. Wow. So you can pretty much prop it, I think, for whatever kind of speed you're looking for. You can start off with the smaller props, the 35 or the 3.5 inch props, and then if you want a little bit more aggressive, maybe like medium, you can switch to the 4-inch 2-blade props. Of course, you know, again, watching your clearance. But then if you want the most aggressive, I would say that these 3-blade 4-inch props are it. Might be some other ones, but this quadcopter feels very agile. I like the way it feels. You can go anywhere, from having it tame for somebody just starting off, or to somebody that wants to, a serious racer can adjust it whichever way they want. So I think I'm ready to do some FPV flying with this. Get over here and landing. All right. So you know, I have to say I really like the way that this turned out. It's a very neat, tight little build. Hobbymate did a good job in putting these kits together and selecting stuff that really works nice together. I'm really happy with this. So like I said, time for a little FPV flying.